Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. This is a private event. Marcus Williams froze mid-conversation. His phone pressed against his ear as he watched the security guard, a thick-set man with cold eyes, step directly into his mother's path. Dorothy Williams, 73 years old and dressed in her Sunday best, navy dress, had been walking toward the hotel's ballroom entrance, where the merger celebration was taking place. "Excuse me." Dorothy's voice carried that particular tone Marcus knew well, the one that meant someone was about to learn exactly who they were dealing with. "This is an invitation-only event for executives and board members." The guard continued, his hand moving to rest on his radio. "I don't see your name on the list." Marcus ended his call with his CFO, mid-sentence. He was 30 feet away, but he could see the exact moment his mother's face shifted from confusion to indignation. Around them, other guests, all white, all in expensive suits, slowed their conversations to watch the spectacle. "Young man," Dorothy said, her voice carrying across the marble lobby, "I am Dorothy Williams. My son is—" "Look, lady, I don't care who your son is. You don't belong here." The guard's voice rose, drawing more attention. "This is a high-class affair. Maybe try the community center down the street." The twist that would unravel everything hung in the air like a loaded gun. In exactly 17 minutes, Marcus Williams was supposed to walk into that ballroom and sign the papers that would make him the majority owner of the very hotel chain, whose security guard was now humiliating his mother. The $847 million acquisition had taken 3 years to negotiate. The contracts were already signed by the sellers. The wire transfers were authorized. All that remained was the ceremonial handshake and champagne toast with the board of directors, the same men now watching his mother being treated like an unwelcome intruder. But Marcus Williams had built his empire on a simple principle: respect was non-negotiable, and he was about to teach everyone in that lobby exactly what that meant. 3 years earlier, Marcus had walked into the corporate headquarters of Grandview Hospitality Group, wearing a $15,000 suit and carrying a business plan that would revolutionize the luxury hotel industry. He'd built Williams Global Holdings from a single food truck in Detroit to a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate spanning real estate, technology, and hospitality. At 38, he was one of the youngest black billionaires in America, though most people didn't know his face. That was by design. Marcus preferred working behind the scenes, letting his results speak louder than his presence. While other moguls courted publicity, he bought companies, transformed them, and moved on to the next challenge. His anonymity was his armor. The Grandview deal was different, though personal. He'd grown up in Detroit, watching his mother clean hotel rooms for $12 an hour, watching her come home with stories about how guests treated housekeeping staff like they were invisible. When Dorothy Williams retired after 37 years of service, she'd never once stayed as a guest in any of the hotels she'd spent her life maintaining. Marcus had promised to change that, not just for her, but for every worker who'd ever been overlooked, dismissed, or disrespected by an industry that profited from their labor while denying them dignity. The Grandview acquisition would give him control of 43 luxury properties across the United States. His plan was ambitious: restructure the entire employment model, implement profit-sharing programs, and create advancement pathways for entry-level workers. He'd already started similar programs at his other properties, turning housekeepers into supervisors, supervisors into managers, managers into executives. But first he had to close the deal, and every minute his mother stood in that lobby being humiliated was another minute the sellers might reconsider. Grandview's board was old money conservative, the kind of men who'd built their fortunes on traditional hierarchies and weren't entirely comfortable selling to someone who looked like Marcus, regardless of his net worth. He'd spent months proving his legitimacy to them: financial statements, references, background checks. He'd attended their country club dinners, played their golf games, spoken their language of quarterly projections and market analysis. He'd jumped through every hoop they'd set up, swallowed every microaggression, endured every articulate and well-spoken comment with professional grace. Also, he could walk into this hotel today and sign papers that would let him transform an industry from the inside out. Also, his mother could finally see the respect she'd always deserved. "Dorothy, what's happening here?" Marcus approached slowly, his voice calm but carrying an undertone that made the security guard's hand drop from his radio. He was tall, 6'3", and had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. His custom-tailored charcoal suit was worth more than most people's cars, and he wore it like armor. "Marcus, this man seems to think I don't belong at your celebration," Dorothy said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly with suppressed anger. The security guard's eyes narrowed as he looked Marcus up and down. "Sir, if this woman is with you, I'll need to see some identification and verify your invitation status." "My invitation status?" Marcus repeated the words slowly, tasting each syllable. Around them, the lobby had gone quiet. Board members and executives had stopped their conversations to watch. Marcus could see James Grandview III in his peripheral vision, the company's CEO shifting uncomfortably near the ballroom entrance. That's right, this is a private function for Grandview executives and approved guests only. If you're not on the list, what's your name? The question came out sharp and direct. The guard straightened. Officer Bradley, sir. Hotel security. Officer Bradley. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that Bradley had to look up to meet his eyes. Do you know why there are 43 Grandview properties across this country? Bradley's face showed confusion. Sir, I just need to see some because people like my mother spent their lives making those properties profitable. Cleaning rooms, serving meals, maintaining lobbies like this one. Marcus's voice never rose, but it carried to every corner of the marble space. She worked in hotels for 37 years. Do you know what she earned for all that service? Sir, I really need you both too. Nothing. Marcus cut him off. She earned nothing but a paycheck that barely covered rent, and the privilege of being treated like she was invisible, like she didn't matter, like she didn't belong in the same spaces she spent her life maintaining. Dorothy placed a gentle hand on her son's arm. Marcus. But Marcus was just getting started. He could see the Grandview board members watching now, their faces ranging from curiosity to concern. James Grandview III was walking toward them, probably hoping to defuse the situation before it exploded. The company they'd already committed to the sale started restructuring based on the expected capital injection. Stock prices would plummet. Board members would demand explanations. His career would be over. Whatever you want, Grandview said desperately. Whatever it takes to make this right. What I want, Marcus said slowly, is for my mother to receive the respect she deserved from the moment she walked through those doors. What I want is for every employee in this building to understand that dignity isn't conditional on net worth or social status. He looked around the lobby, making eye contact with as many people as possible. What I want is for this to be a teaching moment, not just an apology followed by business as usual. Officer Bradley, Marcus continued, I want you to look at my mother. Really look at her. Tell me what you see. Bradley glanced nervously at Dorothy, then back at Marcus. Sir, I see an elderly woman who you see someone who doesn't belong here. Marcus's words were quiet, but they carried like gunshots. Someone who must be lost, or confused, or trying to get into somewhere she has no right to be. Is that what you see? The lobby was dead silent now. Even the hotel staff had stopped moving. I see someone who's not on the guest list, Bradley said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. The guest list. Marcus reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. James Grandview III approached cautiously, his face flushed. Marcus, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Is my mother on the guest list for today's celebration? Grandview's eyes darted between Marcus, Dorothy, and the growing crowd of onlookers. Of course she is. Mrs. Williams is an honored guest. There must have been some confusion. No confusion. Marcus's gaze never left Bradley's face. Officer Bradley here sees an elderly black woman in a hotel lobby and assumes she doesn't belong. Despite the fact that she's dressed appropriately, behaving respectfully, and walking toward an event she was explicitly invited to attend. Bradley's jaw tightened. Now wait just a minute. You wait. For the first time, Marcus's voice rose. Above conversational level, you made assumptions about my mother based on nothing but what you saw when you looked at her. And what you saw was someone who didn't deserve respect. Marcus Williams, James Grandview III stepped between them, his voice taking on a corporate smoothness designed to de-escalate. Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private. No, Marcus didn't move. This conversation happens right here, in front of everyone who witnessed my mother being disrespected. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered board members, executives, hotel staff, and guests who'd been arriving for the celebration. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations. My name is Marcus Williams. And approximately, he checked his watch, 12 minutes. I was scheduled to walk into that ballroom and complete the acquisition of Grandview Hospitality Group, an $847 million transaction that would make me the majority owner of this hotel chain. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed recognition, others confusion, a few skepticism. This is my mother, Dorothy Williams. She raised me as a single parent in Detroit. She worked 3 jobs to put me through school, including 37 years, cleaning hotel rooms. She saved every penny to help me start my first business. She is the reason I'm successful. She is the reason I'm here today. Dorothy squeezed his arm, but Marcus continued. I invited her to this celebration because I wanted her to see what her sacrifices built. I wanted her to walk into a ballroom as an honored guest, instead of as someone hired to clean up after the party ended. I wanted her to experience respect, instead of invisibility. Officer Bradley's face had gone pale. James Grandview 3 looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. Instead, Marcus said, his voice dropping back to conversational level but losing none of its intensity. She was profiled, dismissed, and publicly humiliated by someone who decided she didn't belong here based on nothing but his own prejudices. He turned back to Bradley. You asked for identification. Here's mine. Marcus pulled out his wallet and extracted a black card American Express Centurion. He held it up so Bradley could see the name embossed in silver. Marcus A. Williams. Net worth $2.3 billion. Owner of Williams Global Holdings. Properties in 47 countries. And as of 12 minutes from now, owner of every hotel in the Grandview chain, including this one. Bradley's mouth opened and closed without sound, including the paychecks of every employee in this building, including yours. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Marcus could hear the fountain in the center of the space, the distant hum of elevator motors, the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. But no one spoke. But here's what you need to understand. Officer Bradley, the problem isn't that you disrespected someone with money. The problem is that you disrespected someone, period. My mother deserves respect whether I'm a billionaire or a busboy. She deserves dignity whether she's the guest of honor or someone walking through this lobby on her way to somewhere else. Marcus slipped the card back into his wallet, then pulled out his phone. James, I need you to call the legal team. We're not moving forward with the acquisition. Marcus, please. James Grandview 3's composed corporate facade cracked completely. This is a misunderstanding. Officer Bradley made an error in judgment. We can resolve this, can we? Marcus kept his phone in his hand, but didn't dial. Yet around them, the crowd had grown larger. Hotel guests were stopping to see what the commotion was about. Staff members were whispering among themselves. Can we resolve the fact that your security protocols apparently include profiling elderly black women? Can we resolve the assumption that someone like my mother doesn't belong in a luxury hotel lobby? Mr. Williams, I sincerely apologize. Bradley started. Officer Bradley. Marcus's voice cut through the man's stammering. I don't want your apology. Apologies are what people give when they get caught, not when they develop actual understanding. Dorothy spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. Marcus, honey, maybe we should know. Mama. Marcus's voice softened when he addressed her, but his eyes never left the circle of faces around them. You spent 37 years. Accepting maybe we should. You spent decades making other people comfortable while they made you feel small. Not today. He raised his phone again. James, last chance. How do we resolve this? Grandview's mind was clearly racing through the implications. The acquisition falling through would be catastrophic. Before Bradley stepped forward. Mr. Williams. I made assumptions. I was wrong. I let my biases affect my judgment. It was the first honest thing the man had said since the confrontation began. Marcus studied his face, looking for sincerity beneath the obvious desperation. Officer Bradley. Do you know what my mother did when guests were rude to her during her 37 years in the hotel industry? Bradley shook his head. She smiled. She said yes sir, and no ma'am, and sorry for the inconvenience. She absorbed their disrespect because she needed the job. Because she had a son to raise and bills to pay, and no other options. Marcus paused, letting the words settle. She never had the luxury of making mistakes and then apologizing for them later. She never had the privilege of learning from the experience. She had to be perfect, professional, and invisible every single day for nearly 4 decades. The lobby was so quiet that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. So here's what's going to happen. Marcus looked directly at James Grandview 3. The acquisition moves forward, but with additional conditions. Relief flickered across Grandview's face, quickly followed by apprehension. First, Officer Bradley is terminated immediately. Not suspended, not reprimanded, not transferred to a different property. Terminated. Bradley's face went ashen, but he didn't protest. Second, every Grandview property implements mandatory bias training for all customer-facing employees within 60 days. Not a 1-hour seminar, not an online module. Real training, with real scenarios, conducted by qualified professionals. Grandview nodded rapidly. Absolutely. Whatever you think is, I'm not finished. Marcus's voice remained level. Third, Grandview establishes a scholarship program for hospitality workers, children, full tuition, room and board, no restrictions on major or career path. Starting fund, $10 million. More nods from Grandview, though Marcus could see him calculating the costs in his head. Fourth, every Grandview property displays a plaque in the lobby acknowledging the contributions of housekeeping staff, maintenance workers, and service employees. Not hidden in some corner, not in small print, prominent placement. Marcus turned to address the crowd directly. And fifth, my mother gets a formal apology from Officer Bradley, witnessed by everyone here, not because she needs his validation, but because respect delayed is respect denied, and she's waited long enough. He looked back at Bradley. Officer Bradley, you profiled my mother based on her race and age. You assumed she didn't belong here, because of how she looked, not because of anything she said or did. You made her feel unwelcome in a place where she should have been honored. What do you have to say to her? Bradley's face was flushed, sweat beading on his forehead despite the lobby's air conditioning. He looked at Dorothy, then at the crowd of faces watching him, then back at Dorothy. Mrs. Williams, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Louder, Marcus said. Everyone who witnessed the disrespect should hear the apology. Bradley cleared his throat. Mrs. Williams, I sincerely apologize for my behavior. I made assumptions about you based on prejudice. I was wrong. You deserve respect, and I failed to give you that. I'm sorry. Dorothy studied his face for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the dignity of someone who had endured far worse than this and emerged with her integrity intact. Officer Bradley, I accept your apology. I hope you learn from this experience. I hope you remember that every person you encounter deserves to be treated with basic human dignity, regardless of what you think you know about them. She paused, then added, and I hope you find work that doesn't require you to make judgments about who belongs where. Because clearly, that's not your strength. A few people in the crowd chuckled softly. Even Marcus almost smiled. James, Marcus said, turning back to the CEO, do we have an agreement on the additional conditions? Yes, absolutely, all of it. Then let's go sign some papers. The ballroom celebration proceeded as planned, though with a notably different atmosphere than originally intended. Word of the lobby confrontation had spread quickly among the guests, and conversations buzzed with discussions of bias, respect, and corporate responsibility. Marcus stood at the head table with his mother, watching as board members and executives approached throughout the evening to introduce themselves to Dorothy and share their own stories about family members who had worked in the service industry. It wasn't performative, at least, not entirely. Some genuine reflection seemed to be happening. You know, Dorothy said quietly, as they watched James Grandview III give a speech about the company's commitment to inclusive excellence. You didn't have to do all that for me? Yes, I did. Marcus sipped his champagne. I've spent 3 years playing their game, speaking their language, proving I belonged in their world. But you've belonged everywhere you've ever been. Mama, you just weren't always treated that way. That man Bradley, he's got a family. You cost him his job. Marcus considered this. He cost himself his job. Actions have consequences. Maybe, next time, he'll think twice before assuming someone doesn't belong somewhere. Maybe. Dorothy watched the crowd of executives and board members, all of them now uncomfortably aware of their new owner's priorities. Think this will actually change anything? Some things. Marcus was realistic about the limits of corporate policy changes. The training will help. The scholarship program will make a real difference for some families. The plaques will remind people daily that the workers they don't see are the ones who make everything possible. And the rest will take time. But at least now, they know I'm watching, and they know that respect isn't negotiable. Later that evening, after the contracts were signed and the champagne was finished, Marcus drove his mother back to her house in Detroit. They rode in comfortable silence for most of the trip, both processing the day's events. Marcus, Dorothy said as they pulled into her driveway, I'm proud of you. Not because of the money or the business success. Because of who you chose to be when it mattered. I learned from the best. You did more than learn. You acted. She squeezed his hand. That security guard, he saw an old black woman in a hotel lobby and decided she didn't belong. But you saw your mother being disrespected and decided the whole system didn't belong. As Marcus watched her walk to her front door, he thought about the difference between power and influence. He'd had power for years, the ability to buy companies, transform industries, move markets. But influence was different. Influence was using that power to shift perspectives, challenge assumptions, create change that lasted beyond quarterly reports. The Grandview acquisition was complete, but the real work was just beginning. Officer Bradley would find another job. Hopefully, having learned something from the experience, the bias training would help some employees examine their assumptions. The scholarship program would change lives. But the most important change was already happening. 43 hotels across the country now had an owner who understood that respect wasn't a luxury amenable to some and denied to others. It was a fundamental requirement. as basic as running water or working elevators, and every employee, from housekeeping to management, would know that their dignity was non-negotiable. Marcus smiled as he drove home through the Detroit streets where he'd grown up. His mother was right, he'd learned from the best. Dorothy Williams had taught him that respect was earned through character, not commanded through wealth. She'd shown him that dignity was something you carried with you, not something others could grant or take away. Now he had the power to ensure that lesson reached every corner of his business empire. The deal was done, but the real work changing hearts and minds was just beginning. In boardrooms across the country, executives would tell the story of the billionaire who walked away from an $847 million deal because someone disrespected his mother. Some would laugh, calling it an overreaction. Others would nod in understanding, but all of them would remember it. And maybe, the next time they saw someone who didn't fit their expectations of who belonged in their spaces, they would pause and reconsider. That pause, that moment of reflection, was worth more than any contract Marcus had ever signed.